Alison, the online piano tutor. Today I'm going to be telling you about grade 4 theory. So I've got some worksheets again that I will put into a PDF format for you, and the address will be scrolling up the screen for you, and it'll be in the description bar underneath as well, where you can print these out and keep them for yourself. I've taken it again from the ABRSM or Associated Board grade 4 theory book. So I'm finding that as I'm going up higher up in the grades with these videos, that they're actually getting a lot more complicated, obviously, because they're going higher up in the grades. But of course they're getting more complicated for me to explain them in a video for you. I've done the best I can with them, and I'll do the best I can in the video for you, but I thought what I would go for today is more of an overview maybe, rather than trying to teach you from absolute scratch. I thought I would just kind of give you more of an overview of the syllabus. So I've put some information in the worksheets. I'll go through them, but again, it's probably more to reiterate the subject and the information to you rather than trying to teach you from scratch. I would probably assume anyway that anybody that was trying grade 4 has at least some knowledge of grades 1, 2, or 3, or would have some knowledge of music theory anyway, so it would probably be no surprise to you for any of this stuff. So I'll just go over it again, explain it in my way. That sometimes helps if you've got a second opinion, so to speak, and see how you get on with it. So let's get started. Time signatures. So I've written a lot of information on the sheets here already. I'll just go through it and maybe just add in anything else that I think is necessary. In grade 4, you'll include all simple and compound duple, triple and quadruple time signatures. These are the ones that we've covered so far, and the compound ones. And for new for grade 4 is 4/8, which is 4 quavers or 4/8 notes. And you've got, these are all your new compound time signatures: 6, 4, 9, 4, 12, 4, so that's 6, 9 and 12 crotchets in a bar or quarter notes, and then you've got 6, 9 and 12, 16, which is semi-quavers. In grade 3, we know that the 3 compound time signatures above, so these ones here, I've put an arrow there, must be counted in 3s. So you must have, in groups of 3, so you must have 3 crotchets. So 2 lots of 3 crotchets for 6/8, 3 lots of 3 crotchets for 9/8, and 4 lots of 3 crotchets for 12/8. But that has been explained in my other grade 3 video. The new compound time signatures for grade 4 must also be counted in 3s. So these new ones here, 6, 9 and 12, 4, and 6, 9 and 12, 16, must also be counted in 3s, okay? But the difference is that the 6, 9 and 12 over 4, these ones, which I've put again here, will be counted in groups of 3 crotchets or quarter notes, and the 6, 9 and 12, 16 will just be counted in groups of 3 semiquavers. So basically it's just whatever the bottom number is what you're going to be counting in, as long as it is 3. Remember that in compound the beat is always dotted depending on whatever the bottom note is. So 6/8 would be a dotted crotchet or dotted quarter note. 6/4 would be a dotted minim, and 6/16 would be a dotted quaver. Okay, the alto clef. So this is what the alto clef looks like. The tenor clef, if you have seen that as well, does look exactly the same. It's just situated on a different place on the staves. Again, this isn't really anything exciting. It's more something that you just got to remember, really. The alto clef is situated on what would be traditionally known as the B line in the treble clef, and it's used mainly by the viola. So I know it's not technically the B line, but just go with me here. If you're not a viola player and you don't read the treble clef, and you don't read the alto clef, and you're just used to reading the treble or the bass clef, for example, then this is something new to me. This is something new to you, as it is to me. I play the violin, I don't play the viola, so I'm not used to reading anything in the alto or the tenor clef because I don't play those instruments. So I think of it as middle C being on what we would call the B line. So, you know, when you had every good boy deserves football, imagine that being a treble clef. It sits on the B line, what we would know as the B line, every good boy, or the middle line, whichever way you want to think of it. So that's how you would write that in. That's how you know you're in the right place to writing this in when you come across doing that in your theory exam, if you get asked this question. This is now your middle C. So you just got to pretend it's middle C and just count up and down the lines and spaces to work out what notes you're talking about. If you go to the grade, or if you get the grade 4 ABRSM book, there's lots of examples and tests that will just help this information just sink in a little bit better. Double sharps and double flats. I put this both on one page because there wasn't really too much information to talk about. So double sharps and double flats. Double sharps look like an X. I do apologise about the crudity of the X, but I don't have any symbol on my computer that I could put. It is slightly different when it's printed actually in the music, but I mean, it's, for all intents and purposes, it is an X. So, you know, as long as you recognise it as being an X of some description, then that's fine. And a double flat is with 2 flats. So they're not quite flat, but again, you know, I didn't have that on my computer, so hopefully you just go with it and understand what I'm trying to talk about. So a double sharp is a note that in a sense has literally been sharpened twice. A double flat is a note that has been flattened twice. So if you had, if you played a normal D natural note and you sharpened it, it would become a D sharp. If you sharpened that again, it would become a D double sharp, but you would actually be playing the note of E, but it would be written down as D with an X to simulate that it's, or to show that it's a double sharp. But in all intents and purposes, on the piano, for example, you would actually be playing the note of E. That would be called its enharmonic equivalent. I think I have gone through enharmonic notes, but an enharmonic note is just basically if you've got something like a B flat, can also be an A sharp. It's exactly the same note. If I was going to play a B flat or an A sharp on the piano, it would be exactly the same note. But depending on what music I'm playing, or depending on what key it's in, would just depend on whether it would be called a B flat or an A sharp. So I've just drawn a little, kind of like a little chart here to show you sort of how you would move through the sharps and flats and things here. And that's what an E double sharp would look like. Again, the X is not quite correct, but I didn't have anything else on my computer, so hopefully you can still understand what that means. And that would be, for example, an E double flat. That's what it would actually look like. Breves, double dots and duplets. Well, a breve or a double whole note lasts as long as 2 semi-breves, and it looks like this. So it looks like a semi-breve, but it's got 2 lines either side of it. You can just have it written as 1 line either side. It really doesn't matter. As long as you've got either 1 or 2 lines either side, that's absolutely fine. We know what that means. So that's a breve. Double dots. A double dot behind a note does the same as a single dot behind a note would. So 1 dot after a note increases the note by half of its own value. So I've written that in my grade 1 video, or you can just print out the sheets and look at the information there. And the second dot adds on half of what the first dot is worth. So you look at this example here. I've got a dotted minim, or a dotted half, a double dotted minim or a double dotted half note. If you looked at the minim on its own, we know that's worth 2 beats. The dot is worth half of what the minim is worth, so the dot would then be worth 1. Add that together is 3. And then the other dot is worth half of what the dot before it was worth. So it might be easier perhaps if you just wrote it down so you could see what you were totaling up. So the second dot would be worth half of 1, which is half, so 3.5 in total. It would be the same as having a minim, a crotchet, and a minim, a crotchet, sorry, and a quaver all tied together. It's exactly the same thing. So that's it. As long as you just remember that the second dot does what the first dot does, but it's half of the first dot, not anything to do with the note anymore. It doesn't half the note. So the first dot is half of the note, the second dot is half of the first dot. Duplets. I would say a duplet is opposite to a triplet, where a triplet is trying to crush 3 notes into the timing of 2 notes, getting a kind of a crushed or a hurried feeling. A duplet is putting 2 notes into the timing of 3, so you're almost spreading the 2 notes out. So you've got a feeling of more room, as I've put down here, compared to the crushed feel. So if you see a duplet, you almost have to, in your head, put in another note to count it, so that is taking up the equivalent of that if you like. So it's the opposite of a triplet. If that was a triplet and you were counting up the bar, you would have to knock off one of those notes, otherwise you couldn't count it or you'd have too many. But when you count a duplet, they've almost taken one away, so you've got to put one back in. So a duplet is just the opposite of a triplet. Degrees of the scale. There isn't anything exciting here. All of this is just something that you need to just memorise. You'll need to know the technical names of the degrees or notes of the major and minor scales. So for every note in a scale, we play 8 notes in a scale. For every note in the scale, so in the scale of C, for example, it would be C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C. We're not talking about the letter names, we're talking about the technical names. So for any scale, this would go for. The first note of any scale is called the tonic. The second note of any scale is called the supertonic. The third note is called the median, and so on and so on. The 8th one is called the upper tonic, simply because the 8th one is technically the same as the first one, but upper tonic because it's at the upper end of the scale. I think that's it with that. Just kind of remember that. Triads and chords on 1, 4 and 5. Now these are Roman numerals. We always use we nearly always use Roman numerals for chords. So that's why I've put here Roman numeral for 1, 4 and V is 5. In grades 1 to 3 we've covered the tonic triad, so you can see my grade 1 sheets with the information there. And in grade 4 we'll cover triads on the 4th and the 5th degrees, or the subdominant and the dominant triads, if on the other sheet that we just, degrees of the scale that we just looked at. So this example here is just written out a scale of C with the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th note written here for you so you can see it. And if you looked over here at these chords, this would be the 1st chord in the scale of C, the 4th chord and the 5th chord. So basically, to cut a long story short, I know we're in the key of C because I can see there's no sharps or flats in the key signature, and I know that that's the 1st chord because I'm basically looking at the bottom note. Whatever the bottom note is going to tell me which one of those chords it is. So a chord is made up of the 1st, 3rd and 5th note of the scale. So that is the 1st, the 3rd and the 5th. That one there is I know we're starting with the 4th degree of the scale, but it's still the 1st note, the 3rd note and the 5th note of that particular scale. The 3rd note, the 1st, 3rd and 5th note of that particular scale, but it is the 4th chord in the scale of C. It is the 5th chord in the scale of C, and I know that because I can tell by the bottom notes. The bottom notes are telling me which one of these it refers to. So this section here does get quite complicated, but in grade 5 I'm hoping to do a whole separate video on the part that you have with chords, so hopefully I can try and explain a little bit more about that. I mean, that really is all that you need to know, just the tonic triads, and by tonic it starts on the 1st note of every or any note of the scale. In this case we're doing chords 1, 4 and 5. Information down here: when in a minor key, chord 5 will always sound major. This is because the 3rd of that chord, or the middle note for example, is the leading note. It happens to be the 7th note in the scale, and is always raised, hence actually making chord 5 sound major, but you're in the minor key. So we've got a chord of, this is chord 5 in the key of A minor here. So the 5th note of A minor scale is A, B, C, D, E. So that's why it's starting with E. And then we know that a chord is made up of the 1st, 3rd and 5th. So E, F, G, A, B. So that's why we've got E, G, B. But G is also the 7th note, or the leading note in the scale of A minor, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, so that's 7. That has to be raised, hence that's why we put G sharp there, and then that actually is going to sound major. So the 5th chord in a minor key sounds major. So again, this is more probably just a case of you just memorising the information and hopefully trying to get that to sink in a little bit more. The chromatic scale. In grade 4 you may be asked to write out a chromatic scale. You must remember that for every line and space there will be a note, and certainly no more than 2 notes per line or in a space. My tips are my personal tips that I tell to my students when teaching the chromatic scale. Try not to mix your sharps and flats. I'll go over that in a second. And when writing a descending or going down, going backwards scale, remember to use naturals if and where necessary. So just remembering that if you're doing perhaps a G sharp and your next note is a G, if you don't put that as a natural in front of that second G, that's going to be a G sharp again, because remember the rule of the bar is that if you have a G sharp at the beginning of the bar, for example, another G after it, it has to be a G sharp also, unless you neutralise it and put a natural sign in front of it. If, for example, you're asked to write out a chromatic scale ascending or going up, starting on F sharp, for example, it would be better to write it as, and I've put the example here, F sharp G, G sharp A sharp B, so on, so on. I didn't write it in note form because it would just have taken me ages to put it on this sheet and I'd have run out of room. So imagine that imagine those notes on the stave, but I've just written it in letters. It's probably easy to see it this way anyway. If you keep to sharps, you could be less likely to make mistakes. For example, you could have put this as B flat if you wanted to, but then you'd have to make that a B natural, because if you had that as a B flat, then that would be a B flat as well. So it just gets really complicated. So I always feel that to minimise you making mistakes on your exam papers, if it says F sharp, keep all the accidentals, try to keep all the accidentals as sharps. If you're starting on a B flat, for example, try and keep all your notes as flat. It has a lot more consistency and it's a lot easier. Remember, when you do your exam papers and you're in the exam, you have no idea whether the answers you're putting down are actually right or wrong. But what you can do is to help minimise you making mistakes by checking things through and using little hints and tips to kind of check things through, so that the examiner doesn't pick up the incorrect answers. You try and pick them up as much as possible. So by using these little tips, for example, try not to mix your sharps and flats. That's one way, I guess, that you can limit any mistakes that you might possibly have made. If you're being asked to write out a descending chromatic scale starting on D flat, for example, you could do this. So I've got three options here. The difference between 1 and 2 is that instead of having a B, I've made it a C flat. Instead of having an E, I've made it as an F flat. It's exactly the same note, but that's why I've highlighted them in red, because that's the only difference between number 1 and number 2. I personally would write number 1. That would be my answer to writing it. Just simply because I don't have to worry about any natural signs or anything like that. I've kept it all as flats. I probably wouldn't have written option number 2, simply because a C flat, probably to me it's better known as, or most people it's better known as a B. So just stick to what you know, therefore you're less likely to make mistakes. You could have done it a third way, for example, D flat, C, B, A sharp, A natural, G sharp, G. So if you start mixing, it starts on a flat note. So that's why it's easier if you keep all the rest of the notes or accidentals as flats. But when you start mixing them, can you see how you've got some flats, some sharps, and you have to neutral? And that's what I mean. That's the typical example of then making it a lot more complicated for yourself, having to think a lot more. I'm just saying here that it's a lot more confusing. You've got to think a lot more. You're going to make a lot more mistakes with it. So that would be my personal tip with that. So try that and see how you get on with that. Ornaments. Nothing too exciting with ornaments. I really must apologise for the crudity of this sheet again. I really couldn't get some of the ornaments to come out properly on the programme that I was using, but I really hope that you do understand what I'm trying to get out here. And obviously if you've got a grade 4 book, then obviously you'll see how they've written it properly in the music, but hopefully you just use this to get an idea of what I'm talking about. So you've got acciaccaturas. They're grace notes or crushed notes, and this is what they look like here. I don't know if you can see the little line on the camera here going through it before a note. Appoggiaturas, they're called leaning notes, similar to grace notes or similar to acciaccaturas. There's no line through the little mini note here, and it's normally worth half the value of the main note. Now sometimes people get confused between acciaccaturas and appoggiaturas, but acciaccaturas are grace notes, da-da, For example, appoggiaturet's, it says it there, the top one says leaning note, so da-da. So the smaller note is not the main note, but da-da, that's why it leans on the first and comes back to the main second note. So I guess that the little note has more of an emphasis or a little bit more to it than da-da, than the appoggiatura does. Then you've got a trill or a shake, which is symbolised by a TR. If you had a trill over the note of E, you would normally trill with E and maybe the note above it. So E, F, E, F, E, F, E, da, 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 da. Most of you probably would have played a trill possibly, or have seen one, or know what one is. So that's a trill. Arpeggiation. Normally you play from the bottom notes to the top of the notes as quickly as possible. So this is supposed to be a wiggly line, but again, I couldn't find anything on the computer, so I've tried to kind of do something the best I can for you to see. But you would play the bottom note going upwards, da da da, almost like an arpeggio. That's why it's called an arpeggiation, but really, really quick, much quicker than an arpeggio would be. And then a mordant, or an inverted mordant, otherwise known as an upper or a lower mordant, is almost like a shortened trill, da 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 or da da da, so almost 3 notes if you like. And that's symbolised by, this is very dodgy looking, I had to use I think 2 W's and kind of put them closely together. But if you look in a proper music book or a dictionary or the grade 4 ABRSM book, it will show you much better what one of those looks like. And then finally, a turn is, I haven't written actually what that should look like. It's a sideways S, if you like. I apologise, I've missed that off. It is made of the note above, note itself, note below, and the note itself. So note above, note itself, note below, and note itself. So if you have a look in the ABRSM theory book, there's a lot more examples there that that you can pick and choose. It goes through each one of these and it gives you some examples, and you've got to choose which one you think actually is. I think I'm correct in saying that you don't have to write out any trills in grade 4. I think you just need to recognise them. So again, it's more of a case of just trying to memorise the information that I've given you here. So thanks so much for watching. Don't forget to check out my other videos. I've got lots of violin videos, piano videos, my other theory videos, and obviously grade 5 video as well. And yeah, if you have any comments or anything, leave them in the comment bar underneath. I'll try and help you as much as possible. And thanks very much for watching, and please subscribe if you can.